I sat in my car outside that San Francisco house, hands clamped tight around the steering wheel until my knuckles ached, the sting on my cheek still raw from Gloria's slap, a sharp public crack that echoed through her pristine dining room just hours ago. The night air was cool, but my face burned, not just from the blow, but from the moment my wife Melina's voice cut through the stunned silence, cold and unyielding. Apologize to her or leave. Her words weren't a plea, they were a command, delivered with an indifference that hollowed me out, her eyes meeting mine without a flicker of warmth, siding with her mother over me in front of her entire family. The room had frozen, forks midair, breaths held, every gaze pinning me like a specimen under glass. While Gloria stood triumphant, her lips curled in disgust, spitting, "How dare you touch me, you disgusting man," as if I'd committed some unforgivable sin by brushing her sleeve. I'd stood there, not moving, not speaking, the weight of their judgment suffocating me, my ears ringing as my mind scrambled to grasp it. My own wife, the woman I'd built 8 years with, had chosen to let me drown in that humiliation rather than lift a hand to pull me up. I didn't apologize. I walked out, the door closing soft behind me, but inside something roared awake, a fury and a clarity I couldn't ignore. Hey everyone, I'm Nathan Pierce, 35 years old, and you know what? I've lived through a night that tore down 8 years of marriage like a house of cards caught in a storm, all because of one slap from my mother-in-law, Gloria, that didn't just hit my face. It shattered every illusion I'd clung to about the woman I loved. Picture me sitting in that car, the San Francisco fog pressing against the windshield, my breath fogging the glass as I replayed it over and over. The clatter of silverware, the forced laughter, then that sharp crack of her hand against my cheek, and Melina's voice, steady and cold, telling me to bow or leave. I'm just a guy, a structural engineer who spent years designing bridges to hold weight, never thinking the one I'd built with my wife would collapse under me so fast. 8 years ago, I met Melina at a friend's barbecue near the bay. She was all sharp wit and quiet confidence, her dark eyes catching mine over a crackling fire pit as we talked about everything from jazz to the Golden Gate's rust. I fell hard, thought she did too. 8 months later, we were married, promising forever in a little chapel with the ocean roaring outside. But that night at her parents' house peeled back the truth I'd been too stubborn or too blind to see. I'd spent years bending over backwards for her family, swallowing Gloria's venom because I thought Melina was worth it. From the start, Gloria hated me. Her first words at our engagement dinner, whispered to Richard but loud enough for me to catch, were, "He's not from the kind of family we associate with." I wasn't old money, wasn't born with a silver spoon, just a kid from a working-class neighborhood who'd clawed his way through college on scholarships and grit. I heard her snide remarks, every "oh Nathan, you wouldn't understand" at dinners, every glance that sized me up like I was a stain on her polished hardwood floors. I took it, told myself it was love, that Melina's quiet smiles and late-night talks balanced it out. But sitting there in that car, cheek throbbing, I saw it different. Those smiles had faded, those talks had dried up, and I'd been fooling myself into thinking she'd ever stand up for me. Gloria's house was a museum of her ego, crystal chandeliers, mahogany furniture, walls lined with photos of her perfect life, and that dinner was her stage. She'd been mid-rant about some charity gala, her voice dripping with self-importance, when I'd gotten up to refill my water glass. I brushed her arm, barely a graze, an accident in a tight space, and her hand flew, fast and deliberate, the slap ringing out like a gunshot. The room stopped. Richard's fork clattered, Melina's cousin stared, her aunt's gasp hung in the air, and Gloria loomed over me, venom in her eyes. "How dare you touch me, you disgusting man? Clean my dress and get out." I stood there, water glass trembling in my hand, the heat of her palm searing my skin, waiting for Melina to say something, anything, to pull me back from that edge. Instead, she looked at me, her face a blank mask, and said, "Apologize to her or leave," her voice flat, like she was ordering coffee, not throwing me to the wolves. That was it. The moment I realized I'd married a stranger, a woman who'd let me burn to keep her mother's crown intact. I didn't break. I didn't yell or beg, just nodded, turned, and walked out. The cool night air hitting my face like a lifeline as their whispers faded behind me. In that car, the silence wasn't defeat. It was a wake-up call, a fire igniting under years of ash. I'd spent too long proving myself to people who'd never see me, enduring their jabs because I thought love meant sacrifice. But love without respect? That's not love. It's a cage. My cheeks stung, my pride bled, but my mind cleared. I wasn't going back, wasn't bowing. They thought they'd shamed me out that door, broken me with one slap and a cold stare. They were dead wrong. That night wasn't my end. It was the start of something they'd never see coming, a reckoning I'd been too patient to unleash until now. Let me take you back to that San Francisco night, the dinner that cracked my world open like a fault line nobody saw coming. Melina had insisted we go to her parents' place, a grand Victorian perched in Pacific Heights. All steep gables and stained glass, the kind of house that screamed old money and older grudges. I didn't want to. I never did. Those dinners were a ritual of endurance. Hours of Gloria holding court while I sat there, swallowing her barbs like bitter pills, my tie too tight, my smile too forced. But Melina had pressed, her voice soft but firm over breakfast that morning. "It's just dinner, Nathan. Mom wants us there." I'd sighed, nodded, pulled on a jacket, told myself it'd be fine. Just another night of gritted teeth and small talk. I should have known better. Gloria's dinners were never just anything. The dining room was a stage set for her. Long mahogany table gleaming under a chandelier, silverware glinting like weapons, walls lined with oil portraits of stern ancestors glaring down. Richard sat at the head, quiet as always, nursing a scotch, while Melina's cousins and aunts filled the seats, their laughter a forced chorus to Gloria's endless monologue. She was in rare form that night, regaling us with tales of her latest gala, her voice sharp and self-satisfied. "Of course, the mayor insisted I chair the committee. Nobody else could handle it." I tuned her out, my fork pushing mashed potatoes around my plate, the clatter of cutlery and clink of wine glasses a dull hum in my ears. I'd heard it all before, her boasts, her subtle digs, the way she'd pause to glance at me, lips pursed, like I was a blemish on her perfect scene. Then it happened. I stood to refill my water glass from the pitcher on the sideboard, the room tight with bodies and egos. As I turned, my elbow brushed Gloria's arm, barely a whisper of contact, an accident in the cramped space. But her reaction was instant, explosive. Her hand flew up, a blur of manicured nails and rage, and cracked across my cheek, the sound sharp as a whip snapping through the air. My head jerked, the sting blooming hot and fast, water sloshing from the glass as I stumbled back a step. The room went dead. Forks froze, breaths caught, every eye swiveling to me like I'd just set off a bomb. Gloria towered there, her face twisted in disgust, her silk dress clutched like I'd smeared it with filth, her voice spitting venom. "How dare you touch me, you disgusting man? Clean my dress and get out." The words burned, each one a lash, but the silence that followed was heavier, a suffocating blanket of judgment pressing me down. I stood there, glass trembling in my hand, my cheek throbbing, ears ringing as the room watched, waiting. Melina's cousin stared, wide-eyed, her aunt's hand hovered over her mouth. Richard's scotch paused mid-sip, every gaze a wait, every second stretching into eternity. I wasn't afraid, not of Gloria, not of her rage, but my mind couldn't catch up, couldn't process the public shredding of my dignity. She'd hit me not for some grand offense, but because I'd dared exist too close to her pristine bubble, and now she stood there, expecting me to grovel, to mop her dress and slink away like a whipped dog. I turned to Melina, my wife, my anchor, sitting across the table, her dark hair catching the chandelier's glow, her plate untouched. Surely she'd step in, say something. "Overreacting, Mom, he didn't mean it." Just a whisper of support, a thread to hold on to. I wasn't asking for a hero, just a sign she saw me as her husband, not some outsider to be discarded. But her eyes met mine, empty, cold, a void where I'd hoped for warmth, and her voice came, steady and flat. Apologize to her or leave. It wasn't a question, wasn't a plea. It was an order, delivered with the ease of someone tossing out trash, her face a mask of indifference as she handed me over to Gloria's wrath. My stomach dropped, a sick lurch like falling off a ledge, my lips parting but no sound coming out. I couldn't believe it, couldn't fathom the woman I'd loved choosing this over me. The room held its breath, Gloria's sneer deepening, but I didn't bow. I nodded, slow and deliberate, set the glass down with a soft clink, and turned. My steps echoed on the hardwood, steady, not rushed. The door closing quiet behind me as their whispers erupted, a buzz I didn't care to hear. Outside, the night air hit my burning cheek, soothing the sting but not the wound. She'd chosen them, and I was done. Let's rewind a bit. 8 years of marriage to Melina meant 8 years under Gloria's shadow, a woman who'd hated me from the moment I stepped into her world, her disdain a constant drip eroding my edges. That San Francisco dinner wasn't the first time she'd struck. It was just the loudest, the most public, the crack that finally split the facade I'd held up for too long. I met Gloria the week after Melina and I started dating, her parents' house looming over Pacific Heights, all Victorian elegance and cold formality, the kind of place that made my worn boots feel like an insult on her polished floors. Melina had warned me, Mom's particular. She likes things her way, but I'd brushed it off, figured I could win her over with time, charm, a solid handshake. I was wrong. Gloria's first look at me was a razor, slicing me from scuffed shoes to unpedigreed roots, her lips pursing as she muttered to Richard, "He's not from the kind of family we associate with," loud enough for me to catch over the clink of her teacup. I wasn't old money. Hell, I wasn't any money. Grew up in a clapboard house near the docks, dad a mechanic, mom a nurse, both working doubles to keep the lights on. I'd fought my way through college, scholarships and late-night shifts, landed a job designing bridges, solid, honest work that paid for my life with Melina. But to Gloria, I was a blemish. Too rough, too common, a smudge on her daughter's gilded path. That first meeting set the tone, her handshake limp, her smile a grimace, her voice dripping condescension. "So Nathan, what do you do again? Something with buildings?" I'd explained, structural engineering, bridges, and she'd nodded, blank-eyed. How practical, like it was a dirty word. Melina squeezed my hand under the table, a silent, sorry, but it didn't dull the sting. I'd heard, I always heard, and it never stopped. 8 years of dinners, holidays, awkward visits, she never let up. Her passive-aggressive jabs were an art form. "Oh, Nathan, you wouldn't understand. Our circles are different." Over roast lamb at Easter, her eyes flicking to my faded shirt like it proved her point. Or Thanksgiving, passing the gravy with, "Melina could have done better, but she's always been stubborn, loud enough for the table, soft enough to dodge a fight." I'd grit my teeth, force a laugh, let it slide. Love, right? Melina was worth it. Her quiet strength, the way she'd curl into me on the couch, whispering dreams over late-night wine. I endured Gloria's glances, cockroach stares like I'd crawled into her pristine life uninvited. Because I thought Melina saw me, really saw me, beyond her mother's venom. I'd tell myself it was just noise, that her family's old-world snobbery couldn't touch us, that our little apartment near the Mission, with its creaky floors and shared sketches, was stronger than their gilded cage. But it wore me down. You wouldn't get it, every backhanded, practical man comment chipping at my spine. I'd catch her whispering to Richard, planning Melina's real future as if I were a detour, and I'd swallow it, pour myself into work, into us, thinking effort would earn me a seat at their table. Melina noticed. Sometimes she'd squeeze my arm after, murmur, "Ignore her, she's just Mom." But it was weak, a bandage on a wound she wouldn't stitch. Over time, those murmurs faded. Her defenses thinned, her eyes drifted, and I started wondering if she was ignoring Gloria or agreeing with her. That night at dinner, When Gloria's hand cracked across my face, it wasn't new. It was the crescendo of years, her disgust finally breaking skin. "How dare you touch me, you disgusting man?" Words she'd been itching to scream since day one, now unleashed in front of witnesses, her triumph a spotlight on my shame. I'd stood there cheek blazing, water glass shaking, not because I feared her, but because I'd spent 8 years convincing myself this was temporary. Gloria's hate, Melina's silence, something I could outlast. I'd built bridges to hold tons, but I couldn't bridge this. Her family's contempt, her mother's throne, my wife's quiet surrender. Walking out that door, the fog cool against my burning skin, I saw it. Gloria hadn't just slapped me that night. She'd been slapping me down for years, and I'd let her, thinking love meant taking it. No more, her hand had woken me, and I wasn't the dirt she thought I was. I was done being her punching bag, done letting her write my worth. You'd think after 8 years, after vows, fights, quiet nights stitching us together, Melina would have had my back when that slap landed. But that San Francisco dining room proved me wrong in a way that still twists my gut. Gloria's hand hit my cheek, sharp, deliberate, a public execution of my dignity, and the room froze, a tableau of shocked faces under that chandelier's glow. Silverware clattered, breaths caught, Melina's cousins gaped, her aunt's gasp hung like smoke, and Gloria loomed, her disgust a tangible force, her voice spitting, "How dare you touch me, you disgusting man? Clean my dress and get out." My cheek burned, my ears rang, the water glass trembled in my hand as I stood there, pinned by every eye, Richard's Scotch pause, her uncle's fork mid-bite, a suffocating silence waiting for me to crack. I didn't look at Gloria, didn't give her the satisfaction. I turned to Melina, my wife, sitting across that polished table, her dark hair catching the light, her plate untouched, her face my last lifeline. I wasn't asking for much, just a flicker, a word, something to pull me from that abyss. "Mom, stop. He didn't mean it." Or even a glance, a hand reaching across the divide to say I wasn't alone in this humiliation. 8 years, late nights sketching her dreams while I balanced blueprints, mornings brewing coffee in our cramped kitchen, fights we'd patched with quiet apologies. I thought we'd built something unbreakable. She'd seen me take Gloria's jabs, heard her mother's "not our kind" whispers, felt my tension after every dinner, and I'd trusted she'd stand with me when it counted. My eyes locked on hers, pleading silent. "See me, Melina. See your husband, not her pawn." And for a heartbeat, I held on to hope, waiting for her to break that stillness, to choose me over the woman who'd just branded me filth. But her gaze met mine, cold, empty, a void where I'd prayed for warmth, and her voice came, flat and final. "Apologize to her or leave." It wasn't a whisper, wasn't a hesitation. It was a guillotine, dropping fast and clean, severing me from her without a tremor. My stomach lurched, a sick plunge like the floor had vanished, my breath catching as those words sank in. Apologize or leave. Not "Mom, you're wrong." Not "Nathan, I'm sorry." Just an order, delivered with the ease of someone tossing out a stranger, her face a mask of indifference as she handed me over to Gloria's wrath. The room held its breath, Gloria's sneer deepening, her triumph swelling. But Melina didn't flinch, didn't soften, didn't reach. She sat there, hands folded, eyes steady, like I was a problem to solve, not a man she'd promised to love. I searched her face, those dark eyes I'd once drowned in, the curve of her jaw I'd traced in quiet moments, for something, anything, remorse, regret, a crack in that icy wall. Nothing, just a blank stare, a void that swallowed 8 years whole. My lips parted. "For what?" I wanted to scream. "For breathing? For existing?" But no sound came, my throat too tight, my mind reeling. Apologize for brushing her mother's sleeve, for daring to stand in her sacred space, for being the husband she'd stopped seeing. The absurdity hit me, a bitter laugh bubbling up but dying fast, because this wasn't a mistake. She meant it, every word, her silence louder than Gloria's slap, her choice a blade sharper than any insult. I'd spent years proving myself, working late to keep our home, swallowing pride at every family gathering, thinking she'd fight for me when it mattered. But there she was, calm, unyielding, picking Gloria's crown over my dignity without a second thought. My hands loosened on the wheel, the ache in my knuckles easing as resolve took root. Cold, sharp, unyielding. I'd spent too long proving myself to people who'd never see me, enduring their rules because I thought Melina's love was the prize. But love without respect isn't love. It's a leash, and I'd been choking on it for years. Walking out wasn't defeat. It was the first real choice I'd made in a long time. A line in the sand I wouldn't cross back over. The fog thickened, the house fading into a blur behind me, and I knew. They thought they'd broken me, shamed me into submission with one slap and a cold stare. They'd misjudged me. I wasn't leaving to lick wounds. I was leaving to build something they couldn't touch, to turn their game upside down. That night wasn't my end, it was theirs, and they didn't even know it yet. The San Francisco night wrapped around my car like a shroud as I sat there, engine idling, the fog blurring the edges of that Pacific Heights street. But my mind was razor sharp, cutting through years of haze with a clarity I hadn't felt in too long. Gloria's slap still burned my cheek, a hot imprint of her contempt. But Melina's words, apologize to her or leave, burned deeper, a betrayal that lit a fire I couldn't douse. I'd walked out of that dining room not broken, but awake, done bending, done swallowing their poison for a love that didn't fight back. Sitting there, hands loose on the wheel, the leather cool under my palms, I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They thought they'd shame me into silence, sent me slinking off like a whipped dog. They'd miscalculated. I wasn't retreating. I was reloading, and I wasn't doing it alone. I pulled out my phone, the screen's glow harsh against the dark, and dialed Carter, my best friend since college. A lawyer with a mind like a steel trap and a knack for digging up dirt nobody else could find. He'd been my rock through messy breakups, bar fights, and once, a lawsuit that nearly tanked my career. He thrived on chaos, turned secrets into weapons, and I needed that now. The line barely rang twice before his voice cut through, casual but alert despite the late hour. "What's up, man?" I took a breath, the fog pressing against the windshield, my cheek still tingling, and said, "I need you to dig into something for me. Gloria." My voice was steady, calm, a thread of steel running through it I hadn't heard in years. A pause, then a low chuckle. "Finally ready to fight back, huh?" I didn't laugh. Didn't need to. My silence was answer enough. "More than ready," I said. "Give me a few hours. I want everything. Bank records, property, legal troubles. Anything shady. If she's hiding something, I need it." Carter didn't hesitate. He knew me, knew this wasn't some petty grudge. "Good," he said. "I'll find something. Give me till morning." The call ended with a click, and I leaned back against the headrest, staring at the fogged-up windshield, the city lights smearing into streaks beyond it. This wasn't about revenge, not the hot, reckless kind that burns out fast. This was about respect, something I'd let slip through my fingers, something Gloria had spent 8 years denying me, something Melina had stopped giving long before that slap. I'd endured Gloria's disdain, her not our kind whispers, her cockroach glares, because I thought love meant taking it, thought Melina's quiet presence balanced the scales. But that night, her cold command tipped them. She'd chosen her mother's throne over me, and I wasn't begging for crumbs anymore. My mind raced, plotting in the stillness. Gloria wasn't just a snob. She was a fortress. Her life a polished facade of wealth and control, built to keep people like me down. I'd seen the cracks, her over-the-top galas, her business trips that never added up, the way Richard shrank in her shadow. And I'd ignored them, too busy proving myself to her daughter to care. But now I saw her for what she was, a bully hiding behind silk dresses and chandelier light. And bullies always had secrets. Carter would find them. He always did. And when he did, I'd use them, not to destroy her out of spite, but to show her I wasn't the dirt she thought I was. I wasn't some lowlife she could slap and dismiss. I was the man who'd bring her house of cards crashing down. The fog thickened, the streetlights dimming as I sat there. The engine's low hum a steady pulse under my thoughts. I pictured Gloria's face, her sneer as she'd hit me, her triumph as Melina backed her, and felt the fire grow, not wild but focused, a blade sharpening with every memory of her disdain. 8 years, dinners where she'd mock my practical job, holidays where she'd compare me to Melina's exes, her real men, with trust funds and pedigrees. I'd taken it, smiled through it, thinking it had earned me a place. For Melina, I'd let it slide, her soft apologies after, her mom's just mom shrugs. But that night, her silence wasn't a shrug. It was a choice, and it cut the last thread. I wasn't apologizing, not to Gloria, not to her, not to anyone. I was done playing their game, done being the punching bag in their pristine world. Carter's call would come, I trusted that, and with it, the tools to turn this around. I didn't know what he'd find, money trails, lies, something worse, but I knew it'd be enough. Gloria thought she'd won, thought her slap and Melina's words had sent me packing in shame. She didn't know me, not the real me, the one who'd built bridges from nothing, who'd fought for every inch of my life. The fog pressed in, the car a cocoon, and I exhaled slow, the plan taking shape, quiet, deliberate, unstoppable. This wasn't just about them. It was about me, about reclaiming the respect I'd let them steal, about proving I wasn't the weak link they'd pegged me for. They'd regret that night, not because I'd scream or beg, but because I'd walk away stronger, with their world in ashes behind me. Driving back to our San Francisco apartment from Gloria's that night, the fog clung to the streets like a second skin, but the real weight was inside me. Melina's betrayal, heavy and cold, pressing against my ribs as I pulled into the driveway. The house loomed dark, its windows blank, a shell of the life we'd built over 8 years, nights sketching dreams on the couch, mornings brewing coffee in the cramped kitchen, all hollowed out by her words, apologize to her or leave. My cheek still ached from Gloria's slap, a dull throb under the fog's chill, but it was Melina's indifference that cut deeper, her empty eyes choosing her mother over me in that dining room's suffocating silence. I shut off the engine, sat there, hands loose on the wheel, staring at the house, our house, wondering when it'd stop being home, when I'd stop being her husband in her heart. The front door creaked open as I stepped inside, spilling warm light onto the porch. Melina stood there, arms crossed, her dark hair pulled back, her face unreadable, like I'd just run an errand, not walked out of her parents after a public shaming. You're back early, she said, her tone flat, casual, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just watched her mother slap me and told me to bow. I stepped past her, ignoring it, the air thick between us, my boots heavy on the hardwood as I headed to the kitchen. I poured a glass of water, the faucet's hiss loud in the stillness, my hands steady but my pulse hammering. Anger, yes, but more, a need to know where I stood, to hear it from her. She followed, stopping in the doorway, watching me, her voice breaking the quiet. Are you going to talk to me? I took a sip, set the glass down with a soft clink, and turned to her, meeting her gaze. Those dark eyes I'd once lost myself in, now distant, guarded. Talk to you about what? I said, calm but edged, the words sharp against the hum of the fridge. She scoffed, arms tightening. Don't act like you don't know. You embarrassed my mother tonight. A bitter laugh escaped me, raw and jagged, bouncing off the sage-green walls we'd painted together years ago. I embarrassed her, I repeated, stepping closer, my voice rising just enough to crack the silence. You saw what happened, Melina. She slapped me in front of everyone, and you told me to apologize. She shifted, uncomfortable, her eyes flickering away. You should have just apologized and let it go. I stared, disbelief choking me. Let it go, and echoed, let it go? Your mother humiliated me in front of your whole family, and you want me to let it go? She sighed, exasperated, running a hand through her hair. She overreacted, I admit that. But you know how she is. She was raised differently. She values respect. Another laugh, harsh, hollow, burst out. She values respect? The woman who just disrespected me in front of everyone? I took another step, closing the gap, my voice low. And what about you, Melina? Do you value respect? Because you didn't give me any tonight. She flinched, a quick twitch, but masked it fast with irritation. Why are you making such a big deal out of this? I didn't back down, couldn't, my eyes searching hers, digging for something. Regret, guilt, a shred of the woman I'd married. Nothing. Just annoyance. A wall I'd hit too many times before. Tell me something, I said, quieter now, the question heavy. If I'd slapped your mother tonight, in front of everyone, would you have told her to apologize to me? Her lips parted, a breath caught, but no words, just a beat of silence, long enough to scream the truth. She wouldn't have even considered it, her loyalty a one-way street, paved with Gloria's gold. Her eyes darted away, her throat bobbing, and I nodded, stepping back, the realization sinking cold into my bones. I see, I said, voice steady, the weight of it settling. I'd been a fool, chasing a love that didn't fight back. She frowned. What does that mean? I met her gaze, unflinching. It means I finally understand where I stand in this marriage. She rolled her eyes, frustration flaring. Oh my God, stop being so dramatic. It was one night, one argument. Are you really acting like our whole marriage is ruined over this? I exhaled slow, looking away, the kitchen dim around us. Our kitchen, once alive with laughter, now a tomb for what we'd lost. No, I said, quiet but firm. Our marriage was ruined long before tonight. She tensed, her breath catching. Excuse me. I turned back, my voice even. You stopped respecting me a long time ago. I just refused to see it. Her jaw tightened. You're being ridiculous. You're blowing this out of proportion. A faint smile tugged my lips. No warmth, just clarity. Maybe, or maybe I've just had enough. She opened her mouth to argue, but I didn't wait. Turned and walked upstairs, her voice trailing. Where are you going? I didn't look back. To get some sleep, I said. But it was a lie. I wasn't sleeping. I was thinking, planning, cutting the last thread tying me to her. Upstairs, the bedroom was dark, the clock ticking faint on the wall, and I sat on the bed, our bed, her side empty, her indifference a ghost beside me. 8 years, nights tracing her dreams, mornings shielding her from Gloria's barbs, and she'd stood there cold, choosing her mother's pride over mine without a blink. I didn't need her to beg. I needed her to see me, and she didn't. That silence, that flinch told me everything. Our marriage wasn't a partnership. It was a stage, and I'd been the prop she'd stopped caring about. I wasn't angry anymore, just done, ready to walk away from a woman who'd never fight for me, ready to reclaim what they'd tried to strip away. The next morning broke over San Francisco with a stillness that felt like the calm before a storm. I woke in our mission apartment, the bed cold beside me, Melina's absence a quiet echo of the night before. Her words, apologize or leave, still rang in my ears, her indifference a weight I couldn't shake, but my cheek's dull ache from Gloria's slap was a reminder. I wasn't bowing anymore. I'd called Carter last night, my voice steady in the fog-lit car, asking him to dig into Gloria, bank records, property, anything dirty. And now, as the city stirred outside, my phone buzzed with his text. You're going to want to see this? My heart kicked hard, a mix of dread and anticipation. I grabbed my keys, left without a word to Melina asleep in the guest room, and drove downtown, the fog thinning as the skyline sharpened ahead. Carter's office was a sleek box of glass and steel near Market Street, minimalist and sharp like the man himself. My best friend since college, a lawyer who turned secrets into scalpels. I walked in, the door clicking shut, and he was waiting, a thick folder in hand, a smirk tugging his lips. That was fast, I said, shutting the door, my boots heavy on the polished floor. I don't play around, he replied, sliding the folder across his desk. Take a look. I opened it, my eyes scanning pages, bank statements, property deeds, emails, and froze. the air sucking out of the room. There it was, Gloria's life unmasked. Wire transfers to a private investigator, a hidden condo under a false name, shell companies bleeding cash, and the bombshell. Photos of her with another man, hotel receipts, years of an affair splashed in grainy color. I set the papers down, staring blank. She's been cheating on Richard? Carter nodded, leaning back. For years, covering it with those business trips. But it gets better. He tapped a page. Hundreds of thousands funneled through fake accounts. Payments to a PI named Vincent Russo, a guy known for digging dirt. Blackmail, worse. She's been having you followed, Carter said, voice low. 6 months. Your work, finances, even your old college records. Looking for leverage. My jaw clenched, a cold slap of realization. She hadn't just hated me. She'd hunted me, a predator stalking prey to keep me down. Why? I asked, the word rough, my mind racing. Carter shrugged. Control, maybe. Get rid of you before you fought back. Or just to break you. Either way, she fucked up. Now we've got her. I flipped through the photos. Gloria laughing with some slick-haired guy in a hotel lobby, her arm linked with his, a life she'd hidden behind Pacific Heights polish. Bank records showed cash flowing out, hundreds of thousands unaccounted for, funneled through shell companies to fund her lies, her lover, her PI. Vincent Russo's name glared. Melina's mother had paid him to tail me, to dig through my life, my past, anything to wield against me. My stomach twisted, not shock, but a slow, burning fury. She'd built an empire of deceit, all while sneering at me like I was the filth. 8 years, dinners where she'd mocked my practical job, holidays where she'd sized me up like trash. And she'd been the fraud, the liar, the one cheating on Richard, stealing from their life to keep her mask intact. Carter watched me, his smirk fading. What are you going to do? I met his gaze, the folder heavy in my hands. Use it. He grinned. That's my boy. But careful. Women like Gloria don't go down quiet. I nodded, the fire in my chest steady, not wild but focused. I wasn't here to gloat. I was here to end this. Gloria thought she'd shamed me out that door, thought her slap and Melina's cold stare had crushed me. She didn't know I'd been clawing my way up since I was a kid. Scholarships, late shifts, bridges built from sweat. And I wasn't stopping now. This wasn't petty revenge. It was justice, a reckoning for every not our kind whisper, every glance that had tried to bury me. She'd hunted me, but I'd turned the tables, and she'd feel it. Driving back, the city blurred past, the Golden Gate's rust-red arches, the bay's gray shimmer, and my mind churned, piecing it together. Gloria's business trips, weekends she'd vanish, leaving Richard silent, weren't charity work. They were trysts, funded by lies. The PI, 6 months of my life in his lens, my every move tracked, explained her smugness, her certainty I'd never rise. She'd wanted dirt to control me, to keep Melina tethered to her throne, but she'd overplayed her hand. I'd given 8 years, worked late to keep our home, taken her jabs for Melina, thinking love meant endurance. That slap, Melina's betrayal, woke me. Love without respect was a cage, and I was done rattling its bars. Back home, Melina was in the kitchen, coffee in hand, her eyes narrowing as I walked in, folder tucked under my arm. "Where were you?" she demanded, voice sharp. I set my keys down, calm. "Out!" She frowned. "We need to talk." I smirked. "Yeah, we do." My tone cold, unshaken. She had no idea what I held, no clue the storm I'd unleash. This wasn't just about Gloria. It was about us, about the respect she'd never given, about the man I'd let myself become. The truth in that folder wasn't a weapon to hurt her. It was a key to free me, and I was ready to turn it. The air in our San Francisco apartment near the Mission was thick that evening, the sage-green walls closing in as I waited, whiskey in hand. The folder from Carter heavy on the kitchen table, a ticking bomb I'd set to blow. I'd called them, Melina, Gloria, Richard, hours after leaving Carter's office. My voice calm over the line. "Come over." We need to talk. No threats, no hints, just an invitation they couldn't refuse. Curiosity or arrogance pulling them here. The slap still lingered on my cheek, a faint ache under the fog's chill. But Melina's apologize or leave burned hotter. Her betrayal the spark that lit this fuse. 8 years, dinners swallowing Gloria's venom, nights patching fights with Melina, ended here, in this room, with the truth I'd wield like a blade. The doorbell rang, sharp and final, and I opened it, stepping aside as they filed in. Melina tense, Gloria regal, Richard stiff, unaware they'd walked into their reckoning. Gloria strode past me, heels clicking on the hardwood, her silk scarf a banner of superiority, not sparing me a glance as she spoke. I assume you've had time to reflect on your behavior. Her voice dripped condescension, her lips pursed like I was still the dirt she'd slapped away. Melina crossed her arms, eyes darting between us. Can we just talk like adults? Richard lingered by the door, scotch already in his grip, his face unreadable. A man braced for something he couldn't name. I took a slow sip of whiskey, the burn steadying me, and set the glass down. That depends. Are you ready to act like one? Melina's eyes narrowed. Don't start. But I ignored her, my gaze shifting to Gloria. You came all this way. Let's just skip the theatrics. What do you want? She scoffed. An apology for starters. You embarrassed me last night. A laugh broke from me, raw, bitter, echoing off the walls. Let me get this straight. You slapped me in front of everyone, humiliated me, and you think I owe you an apology? Gloria's lips curled. You should have handled it better. An accident, yes, but you stormed out like a child instead of diffusing it. I nodded slow, setting my drink down. You're right. I should have handled it better. Her expression flickered, sensing the shift, the trap, and I turned to Richard, watching him close. That's why I made some calls, had some conversations. Gloria stiffened. What are you talking about? I smiled, cold and steady. How was your last business trip, Gloria? Panic flashed across her face, a quick raw crack, before she masked it. That's none of your concern. Richard shifted, brows furrowing. What's he talking about? I pulled my phone from my pocket, swiped the screen, and held it up. Photos spilled across it. Gloria with a slick-haired man, hotel lobbies, restaurants, private getaways, years of deceit in vivid color. Richard's face paled, his glass trembling, Gloria's mask shattering as she hissed, Where did you get that? I shrugged. Does it matter? Melina's mouth opened, confusion bleeding into disbelief. What? What is this? Richard turned to Gloria, voice low, dangerous. Is this true? She stammered, reaching, Richard, please, it's not. But he cut her off. Save it. His face cold, detached, a man seeing his wife for the first time. I stepped forward, voice even. I always wondered why you looked down on me, Gloria. Turns out you're just a liar hiding behind a perfect image, treating me like garbage while you cheated on him. Richard's fists clenched, his breath shaky. You've been cheating on me? Gloria's panic spiked. Richard, please. But he stepped back, disgust raw. Don't. I flipped open the folder, tossing papers on the table. Bank records, shell companies, payments to Vincent Russo, the PI who'd tailed me for 6 months. And that's not all, I said. Hundreds of thousands funneled through fake accounts. Your business trips, your lover, and this guy digging into my life, looking for dirt to bury me. Melina's eyes widened, darting to the papers. Then me. You did this on purpose. I met her gaze unflinching. No, Melina. Your mother did this to herself. I just made sure the truth came out. Her face crumpled. Anger, shock. You wanted revenge. I exhaled. No, I wanted respect. Since you wouldn't give it, I took it. Gloria whirled on Richard. You're really going to believe him over me? Your wife? He laughed bitter. I don't have to believe him. The proof's right there. He shook his head. I should have known. You always thought you were better than everyone. But you're a fraud. Her control slipped, her voice rising. You'll regret this. I stepped closer, voice low. No, Gloria. You will. She grabbed her purse, stormed out, the door slamming, a crack in her empire. Richard followed quieter, his steps heavy with a man done. Melina stayed, tears brimming. I don't know who you are anymore. I smiled faint. Maybe you never did. She swallowed. Do you still love me? I let the silence stretch, then said, I love the woman I married, but I don't know if she exists anymore. Her breath hitched, a tear falling, but I walked past, leaving her in the wreckage. She'd chosen Gloria. Now she had nothing. The room emptied, the silence thick. I'd torn their world apart, not with rage, but with truth. Gloria's throne crumbled, Richard's loyalty snapped, Melina's illusions shattered, and I stood there, not broken, but free, the fire in me burning steady. They'd thought that slap was my end. It was theirs. The days after that San Francisco showdown stretched into a quiet I hadn't known in years. The Mission apartment was a ghost town, Melina's absence a void I didn't mourn. The sage-green walls a silent witness to the end of 8 years. I'd walked out of that confrontation with Gloria's secrets spilling like blood, Richard's world cracking open, and Melina's illusions shattered. But the real weight lifted wasn't theirs. It was mine. The folder from Carter sat on the kitchen table, its pages dog-eared and coffee-stained, a testament to the chaos I'd unleashed. Gloria's affair, her shell companies, the private investigator she'd sicked on me for 6 months, all laid bare in that room, under the harsh light of truth. I'd watched them crumble, Gloria's rage, Richard's disgust, Melina's tears, and felt no triumph, no glee, just a steady calm, a freedom I hadn't tasted since I'd slipped that ring on her finger. Melina stayed that night after the others fled, her footsteps soft on the hardwood as she lingered in the living room, arms wrapped tight around herself like she could hold the pieces together. I don't know who you are anymore, she'd whispered, her voice trembling, tears streaking her face, a face I'd once traced in the dark, memorizing every line. I'd stood there, whiskey glass cold in my hand, and said, maybe you never did, my tone flat, final. She'd asked, do you still love me? A desperate plea, her eyes searching mine for a lifeline. And I'd let the silence stretch, heavy and unbroken, before answering, I love the woman I married, but I don't know if she exists anymore. Her breath hitched, a sob breaking free, but I walked past her, up the stairs, leaving her to drown in the wreckage she'd chosen. She didn't follow, didn't fight, and by morning, she was gone, the guest room empty, her keys on the counter like a surrender. I didn't chase her, didn't call, didn't beg. 8 years, nights sketching her dreams while I balanced blueprints, mornings shielding her from Gloria's venom. Ended with that quiet exit, and I let it go. The weight of her betrayal slipping off my shoulders like a coat I'd worn too long. The divorce came fast. Papers signed in a sterile office near Market Street. No arguments over assets, just a clean cut. We sold the apartment. Too many ghosts, too much history. And I walked away with half, enough to start over, my boots echoing on the hardwood one last time as I left that life behind. Melina didn't fight it, didn't look at me as the pen scratched across the page, and I didn't care. She'd chosen Gloria's throne over me, and now she had nothing, her mother's empire in ashes, her world unmoored. Gloria's downfall was a spectacle I watched from a distance. Carter's leak hit the news like a tidal wave. Headlines screaming, prominent socialite Gloria D. caught in scandal, infidelity, fraud, embezzlement. The affair photos splashed across tabloids, her shell companies unraveled by investigators, her bank accounts frozen as the IRS closed in. Richard filed for divorce the next day, taking half her fortune, years of silent obedience snapping into a quiet, devastating exit. Her Pacific Heights mansion went dark, sold off to cover legal fees, and she slunk to a condo on the city's edge, a shadow of the queen who'd slapped me down. Her high society friends, those vultures who'd fawned at her galas, turned their backs, her invitations dried up, her name a punchline whispered over martinis. I didn't gloat, didn't need to. Her ruin wasn't my victory, it was her consequence, a mirror held to the fraud she'd always been. I moved, a small loft near the Presidio, Bare walls and hardwood floors, a view of the bay through fog-streaked windows. No traces of Melina, no echoes of Gloria. Just me, my blueprints, my life, raw and unburdened. The first night I stood on the balcony, the city's hum soft below, and breathed, really breathed, for the first time in years. No more dinners dodging Gloria's barbs, no more nights wondering why Melina's eyes drifted, no more proving myself to a family that had never seen me. I'd spent 8 years building bridges for them, literal ones at work, fragile ones at home, and they'd burned them all, that slap and her cold stare the final torch. But walking away, tearing their world down with truth, I'd built something stronger. Me, whole, unapologetic, free. Carter came by a week later, beer in hand, his smirk wide as we leaned on the balcony rail. "You see the news?" he asked, sipping slow. "Gloria's evicted. Couldn't pay the condo. Living with some cousin now, selling jewelry to eat." I nodded, the bay's gray shimmer catching my eye. "Karma's a bitch." He chuckled. "You're thriving, man. How's it feel?" I exhaled, the fog cool against my skin, like I can breathe again. He clinked his bottle against mine. "To new beginnings." I raised mine, to never being trash again, and drank deep, the bitterness gone, replaced by something clean. Relief, maybe hope. I wasn't the man they'd pegged. Weak, disposable. I was the one who'd walk through their fire and come out steel. Weeks later, Melina showed up, unannounced, standing at my door, her hair loose, her eyes hollow, a fragility I didn't trust. "Can we talk?" she asked, voice soft, hesitant. I let her in, arms crossed. "Make it quick." She looked around, bare walls, no past, and said, "I'm leaving the city. I screwed up, Nathan. I see it now." I watched her, waiting for the old ache, the pull to fix us, but it didn't come. Just silence, a blank space where she'd once lived. "I loved you," she whispered, "but I let her ruin it. I'm sorry." I nodded. "I know. Take care, Melina." She left, the door clicking shut, and I stood there, free of her shadow, her mother's venom, their world. A man rebuilt, stronger than they'd ever know. If the people you love strip you of respect, don't bend. Rise up, break free, like I did when Melina and Gloria tried to bury me under their contempt. I spent 8 years as their punching bag, taking Gloria's slaps, literal and otherwise, thinking love meant enduring, until that San Francisco night when her hand cracked my cheek and Melina's cold, "Apologize or leave," cracked my world. I didn't bow. I walked away, tore their lies apart with truth, and watched their empire crumble. Gloria's fraud exposed, her fortune lost, Melina's loyalty rewarded with nothing. You're not their doormat, their scapegoat, their shadow. Demand your worth, and if they won't give it, take it back. I left them with their wreckage. Gloria, a fraud in a crumbling condo, Melina, a ghost fleeing the city, and built a life they can't touch, stronger for every scar they left. You've got that fire too, the grit to stand when they push you down, to turn their disdain into your strength. I'm not the man I was, waiting for approval, swallowing shame. I'm free, breathing deep, living for me. Step out of their cages, burn their rules, and don't look back, because the moment you stop begging for respect and start claiming it, you'll find a freedom they'll never understand. Tell me, when they try to break you, will you bend or will you rise?